hello, and welcome to the Venue Success Podcast. I'm your host, Tirzah Caffee, and our theme in season 2 is tools of the trade, the pros behind the process. So we have another incredible pro with you today. We have Justin Sutton with Nuptial Risk Insurance, and we will be talking all about the best ways to protect yourself and your wedding business. So happy to have you here today, Justin.
Thank you, Tirzah. I am very happy to be one of the kindest people in the wedding industry that I know of. Thank you for having me.
Well, you're very, very sweet. I appreciate that. But for any of our loyal listeners, you know that we start every episode with crazy stories with Tirzah. And this is actually the first time I've ever asked someone else to share a crazy story, because when I was thinking about today's session, I was like, I'm sure that Justin and I could probably sit and talk for hours and hours and hours about all the crazy things that have happened that, maybe he's not in the weeds of seeing it actually happen like I am, but he has a lot of clients around the country. So I asked Justin to do crazy stories with Justin because people have lost their minds. So take it away, my friend.
Yeah, so I have a lot of them. I mean, I don't have enough fingers or toes, but I'll tell you about a really crazy bad one. Venue we work with in Georgia, they also have attached to their venue some lodging accommodation. So that's pretty typical these days. And I think they had rented it to maybe 8 people. There were, at the time the deck collapsed, there were 18 people on the corner of the deck that also supported a hot tub. They were trying to take a picture, and there were 2 people who were on the railing. And the house was only about, I think it was built in 2016. This was like 5 years ago. So at the time, it was 3 or 4 years old. The railing was put together with finish nails. It pulled apart. Those people fell 30 feet. They had to be airlifted. It was crazy. They are now, I'll get into this a little bit more, but this was at a previous spot. It was at that retail agency I worked with before I started Nuptial. So they were suing at that time for $6 million.
Do you know whatever happened? Like who won the lawsuit or?
I'm not sure. What was kind of weird about the whole thing, there were a couple different people involved. The property manager that actually managed the short-term rental for them booked it versus them booking it for the venue, because they let the property manager deal with it kind of off wedding weekends. And these people, this was actually during Thanksgiving, so they didn't have a wedding or anything planned. So the PM had booked the space. But yeah, so they sued the PM for $4 million. The venue had a couple $1 million in liability coverage. And so we unfortunately don't work with them anymore. I don't think it was related to the lawsuit. They went out of business. So
I hope no one passed away from that situation. Do you know? Like everyone was okay?
They didn't, but they were in the hospital for a long time. And that was one of the reasons. I know one had to learn to walk again. So it was really bad. Crushed hips, the injuries were really, really bad. I mean, they literally fell 30 feet.
I mean, the
They tried to go after the construction company.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's not like it probably rotted or anything, but oh my gosh, they used finish nails on
No screws in the deck.
Oh,
Basically, all of the discovery process and stuff. I mean, there were so many shortcuts taken in the construction of that house and the deck. And then it wasn't, the deck was not properly, it wasn't built to support a hot tub in the air 30 feet either.
Well, that's true too, right? So there might have been some mistakes on the homeowners as well, for sure. I mean, that's very, very heavy.
Yeah, crazy.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you for sharing that terrible story. I'm sure there's a lot of people that will never go on a deck again in the rest of their life.
Be careful of decks. That's one thing that, from a loss control perspective, we have to look at pretty closely. Vertical railing instead of horizontal. Those are things to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh my goodness. We have so much fun stuff to talk about today. So we thank you for your crazy story with Justin. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, so I was reading your bio and I haven't told you this yet. So the fun fact, I always ask people like, what's a fun fact about you? And I read yours and I was like, that's really creepy, Justin. Like, why did you share that with me? And it said that he's a big foot lover is the way that I read it. And I was like,
Whoa, 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 no, no, no.
and I just started dying laughing when I was like, oh, wait a second. Bigfoot lover,
Bigfoot,
not
yeah,
Bigfoot lover. If you had capitalized Bigfoot, I wouldn't have gone there in my mind. But I was like, I
sorry.
did not. I'm like, your poor wife. Anyway, there we go.
Yeah, definitely Bigfoot, like bipedal, hominid, ancient creature, mythical.
So my daughter is also a believer in Bigfoot. Yes, I know that there is a whole world of people that, love to follow Bigfoot. So we won't be distracted by those things today. But anyway, I thought you would get a kick out of that. So I'm going to actually, again, I don't often do this with a bio, but because this is a very misunderstood kind of topic, and Justin and I were talking about this a little bit before we started, it's like, oh, he does insurance. And it's misunderstood, kind of like how all inclusive is misunderstood, that people define it in different ways. And so I actually want to read his bio to you. You're going to hear some of his humor in this bio, but I feel like it's going to be really helpful for you to understand truly what it is that Justin does. So when it comes to wedding venues, Justin isn't just the guy who knows how to, quote, save the date. He's the guy that helps make sure it doesn't need to be saved in the first place. As a fearless chief ever after officer at Nuptial, Justin has spent over a decade showing venue owners how to dodge disasters before they even appear on the radar. Forming Nuptial in 2022 was Justin's way of making the world a safer place, one flower-laden aisle at a time. He and his team work with over 300 venues across 35 states, equipping owners with proactive strategies to manage risks effectively. His secret sauce? A philosophy that's as simple as it is uncommon. Products don't solve problems, but processes can help solve products. What's that translation? Insurance is great, but it's the last line of defense, not the first. Justin believes that no one should have to rely solely on insurance to solve a problem because, let's be real, everyone enjoys writing premium checks just about as much as a root canal. Agreed. Instead, Nuptial helps venue owners put policies and procedures in place to help avoid chaos altogether. Whether it's protecting a century-old barn from unruly groomsmen or keeping an elegant ballroom free of champagne-related mishaps, Nuptial's got you covered. When he's not busy helping venue owners master the fine art of risk management, Justin can likely be found explaining to people that no, Nuptial isn't a wedding planning business. Actually, I thought that when I first heard about your business too, though his attention to detail might make them pretty okay at that too. So welcome again to the show, Justin.
Thank you.
I knew that I wanted you to be towards the beginning of season 2 because I strongly believe, as I have coached venues all across the country for many, many years, that this is an area where there is just a lack of understanding around risk in general. And when we don't understand the risks that we have as venues, and I personally believe our risks are higher than almost any other vendor in the industry, right? That we don't even know the questions that we should be talking to our insurance agents about and the things that we should be making sure to have in our policies, just because, again, it's just a lack of understanding, right? It's nobody's fault. But so let's just jump right into it. I want to get you sharing your expertise as quickly as possible. But the first question I had for you is, I know that people will often call you, and it's kind of like when they call me and they're like, hey, how much does a wedding cost? And we're all inclusive. So it's not just like an easy answer, right? And I know people probably call you and they're like, hey, Justin, I need a quote. When there's just so much more to it, there's probably a better question to ask. So when you are initially talking with someone, like, what is the better question that they could be asking? Like, how do you start that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's about what can I do to protect myself? And a lot of people, I hear it pretty commonly. Yeah, well, I have insurance for that. Well, what the better question to your point should be is what keeps me up at night and what can I deal with myself? And let's figure out what keeps you up at night and what you can deal with yourself first. And likely that's going to lead to a better outcome on the insurance side of things.
So give
So
me an example of that.
yeah, so let's just say, you mentioned the quote thing earlier, like, hey, I need a quote. Well, there's a lot of things that go into that, but insurance, it is probably the last thing that you want to resort to, because we need to talk about business structure. We need to talk about contracts. We need to talk about loss control. Those are all things that you dictate yourself, and loss control can comprise a lot of different things. So can contracts. So,
So just to the
if
more newbie people out there, explain loss control.
I mean, that would be something as simple as, hey, what's the lighting like in your parking lot? What's the ingress and egress into the building? Do you have video? Do you have, um, a fire suppression system if you have a commercial kitchen? Most venues don't, but I mean, that's something. Do you have an alcohol policy? Do you have a certificate review process with vendors? I mean, that list is 10,000 items long, but when have you ever talked to someone who sells insurance who has asked you those things?
Never. Most
Never.
people never.
Yeah, and that's because we're conditioned as people to get to the point, I need a quote. We're going back to that part. But that's not the best outcome for you, because a person who is responsible for insurance, typically they're going to get paid by providing you a quote, then making the sale. If that's all they're going to get paid to do, that's the only advice they're going to give you is, hey, here's a quote. It's a lower number than what you had. Do the terms really matter? We're not sure. This is what you have to pay. And that's where the industry itself goes wrong. And that's where I have to tell people, hey, I respect that question. I totally understand where you're coming from. But if you just want a quote, then we're not the right people, because you have a lot of weapons at your disposal that people aren't talking to you about. And we need to work with those first, because they're going to get you a lot better results on the last part of this journey or process or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. So what kind of dovetailing off of that, how do you feel that wedding venues, because you mostly specifically work with venues, correct?
Yeah, that's all I do.
Okay. So how do you feel that venues are different from other industry professionals in terms of
Well,
our risk and liabilities? I mean, this is a
they're
huge question.
Yeah, they're different and similar in a lot of ways. So, most businesses don't have other businesses operating in their space nonstop. And so that's really unique. Now, I will say property management and construction, those sound like very different industries, but when you boil it down from a risk perspective, they're not. And so we take more of a consultative approach from a background in construction. So, and I don't have a background in construction. I don't, but what we have done is taken almost the risk management concepts of both property management and construction, and at a really high level, and boiled those down to make them apply to the wedding industry, because they're very similar industries. Because again, you have people renting the space, and then you also have people who are other that effectively subcontractors, but they're not working under your direction, who are in your space as well, almost like a construction site.
No, that makes sense. So how is it, just explain to listeners what it is that you do. It's not just signing a policy with Nuptial, right? Like it's
Yeah.
not doing that. So if say there's a venue, they've been around, they're newer, maybe 3-4 years, and they're now realizing, oh my gosh, all of the things that I didn't know, like how would you come in and help someone? And again, not just a new venue, but it could be like me, where I've been around for a long time. We've had some great conversations about that. Um, what do you do to like really help them assess and kind of see where they're at in terms of their risks?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just like going to a doctor for the first time. We want a picture of where they are. Like we may know the symptoms, but we don't know, what's causing it. So we have a questionnaire process. There's, and people in my industry would call it a risk tolerance survey. So that's something we take. We, look at the property. We want to see what, like I mentioned earlier, what keeps you up at night. What is apparent that you don't feel good about, that you don't know? And then maybe how can we uncover some things that you don't know that you don't know? You know?
Right, right.
because there are always those things that you don't know. And so we take a look at that, and then, it's just about, first, it's a conversation. Like I want to have a really good relationship with someone. I want to know what's important to them and where they want to be in 5 years, because we need to know what kind of flexibility do we need to build in. Like we need to know, hey, is this something you want to pass on to your family or your kids, or like, and those are conversations that are never had with an insurance agent. And we do that and we're experts at that, but you have to approach it a different way when, this might be a 200-year-old farm that's been in the family for a really long time, and it needs to be in the family for a really long time into the future. And so these things are very, very personal. It's business, but it's personal in the same vein. So I mean, I just want a picture of what things go on at the venue, and I want to know where the parking lot is, where the ceremony site is, and also important things like, what do you require of vendors? What does your rental contract look like? Do you have a preferred team of vendors? Who's your ideal client? Because those are all things that, if we're dealing with different parts and pieces, like, the antidote at the end might be totally different. So I got to know that stuff too, not just what's your premium and what's your coverage.
And are you learning those things so that you can make adjustments to insurance policies and like make it a little bit less cookie cutter? Is that what I'm understanding? So that you can really customize it to those individual properties?
Yeah. And I mean, the other thing is just like, if you have an insurance policy, and let's just say, and not to, let's just say it's similar to your situation. Anybody can look on the internet and find this out. Let's say there's a holding company that owns the property, and there's a business who operates the venue itself. Okay, I need to know if there's a lease agreement between those two. This is a really simple step, and I mention this a lot, but this is something that I find 80% of venues who are set up this way, or maybe 90, it's super high. They are leasing from an entity, but there is no legal codification of that. And we don't know, okay, who's responsible for, let's just say somebody tripped and fell in the parking lot. Well, we don't know who's responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the parking lot. Well, that's a risk that we have to associate somewhere. And if it's not associated, then the owner has to deal with it, which is what you don't want. And then is the insurance going to work the right way? So these are all little things. If you've got an exclusive bartender and you don't get the right COI from them with the right additional insured on it, then the event policy that you also require is not going to cover you, because there's an exclusion for off-premises alcohol when they're in a motorized vehicles. We got to get those things right too. So the risk transfer. So yeah, I mean, there's just so many different things. And that's why I try to slow people down a little bit. This is intentional. We want to take time here. If you need something in 2 weeks, there's probably 15 other brokers within 20 miles who can get you a number in 2 weeks that can help. I don't want to say I'm not sensitive or don't want to try and help, but it's just about a lot more than that.
And it's the thing that having you here, like, this is the exact reason why I wanted our listeners to hear about you, because there's an opportunity in the wedding industry for a quick cash grab, for people that are just coming in and they might want to market themselves as a, wedding industry insurance or whatever. Like, go to any of the wedding shows and you'll see many, many of them. But I could tell you from personal experience that they aren't customizing it really. They don't know you. They don't know your property. They don't know what your true risks are. And so I really appreciate that about you. I mean, I think it's really important for venue owners. And again, whether you are a new venue or you've been around for a long time, I think in the beginning, it's more of a naivety, about how terrible people can actually be when it comes to suing. We're in a very crazy world these days. And if you've been around for a really long time and you're, and I confess to this, I could become a little complacent. I could be like, oh, I've been doing this forever. I don't want to go back and redo my policies. Like, I don't have time to deal with that. I would just really encourage you to have someone like Justin look at it and look at your risks and look at something with fresh eyes, because some of the things that we're so accustomed to around our property, someone else comes in and they're like, oh my gosh, did you ever think of this? Did you ever look at this area? It doesn't have a railing. Like, just even little things like that we just might not think about. It's really great to have that fresh pair of eyes looking at our properties for sure. I mean, we have water at our venue, and it's a pond, and I know a lot of venues have ponds. To me, those are things that keep me up at night. Do I have enough light around my pond? And you're talking about loss control. Like, to me, that's what I'm thinking about all the time. Like, what are we writing in our policies about children on our property? And I hadn't planned to talk to you about this, but I'd like to maybe take a pause here and talk about the risk of children at weddings and see if you have any insight into that. One of the things that we do, and you could give me your feedback about this, but if they have over 5 children attending their wedding, we require that they have a designated individual that's going to be taking care of childcare, because we don't want kids running around our property unattended. And I see this happen a lot at venues. It's actually the reason why we stopped having fire sprinklers at our venue. Oh, there's another thing we should probably talk about. So talk to me about those 2 specific things, like dealing with having minors, specifically children at venues, and some of the risks that could come along with that. And then talk to me also about your thoughts about having sparklers at weddings.
Yeah, we see there's kind of an emerging trend with family suites that I see now. So that's something that I think is a good thing to help. The only problem is you don't want a staff member to man the family suite. You're not in the business of childcare. You're in the business of incredible events. So I think it's important to be mindful of that. But, childcare is definitely, or, kids running around. I don't know. I think every parent probably does this because they're, no parent's as good as you, the parent. Gosh, why are they letting their kids run around and be, hooligans like that or whatever, and I think it's really good to be mindful of those things because they're going to happen. So what you need to do as an owner is think about, at some point, despite what we do, we want, let's just say, for instance, our couples, we have a swing and they want to take pictures on that swing. So that's something we've got the swing out. There will be kids on that swing. So what's the policy that we have that is written that addresses that swing? Does the swing get pulled to the side and hung up on the tree in a little hanger? Those are the little things that, can make all the difference, specifically when they're written. So this isn't just like hey, this is what we do and it's kind of understood. For you to protect yourself, there has to be a written policy and procedure. And those things are mind numbing. They're awful. They're boring. But from my perspective, those are things you do one time. You put them in a notebook somewhere. You review that with your staff once a year or with every new hire, and you don't have to do it again. And that is premium dollars. So again, when we get back to, these are the little things that we talk about that will give you leverage over a premium outcome or a coverage outcome, because those are the things that I can explain, or somebody like me could explain to a carrier to say, hey, we're already mindful of this. We know what's going to happen. We've addressed it via policy. There may not be quantifiable savings, but that's loss control, and that's something to make a carrier feel good to give you better terms.
I absolutely agree with that. And I think going back to those policies and guidelines, sometimes people are like, I don't want to come across like, I've got pages and pages of policies. Why? Why not? That is your protection. My policies and guidelines is 6 pages.
Yeah.
And I don't care. I mean, and people actually, we write it in such a way that it's not like, no, you can't do this. It's basically saying, this is the way that we do it. So the way that you word it, it's like, we wouldn't have to say, no, you can't use the swing. It's for the safety of our guests. The swing is used for professional photography, blah, 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 blah. We ask that children do not play in the swing. So you could word it in such a way that you're not coming off as a jerk. But again, I think it's totally acceptable to have a robust policy and guideline, let people know the parameters. Not that you're going to be pulling it out all of the time and holding it over people, but at least if you have, say you have 15 kids that show up and you weren't aware that you're going to have all these kids, you could pull it out if it got to that point and be like, hey, the bride and groom signed this policy that all children, have to be watched by a legal guardian or an adult. And again, it doesn't normally get to that point.
Yeah, and I think a lot of things can be addressed on the policies and procedures side in an employee handbook or just something that's internal. Like, look, we don't want to tell our clients no, like we want them, this is a yes day for them. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have a person who is dedicated to follow around the photographer. And if she goes to the swing, then we pull the swing off of, whatever's holding it up. And then after they're done, we put it back up. So we don't have to put in the policy that your kids aren't allowed on the swing.
Right. Right. No, it's
You
so
know,
good. So
little
let's talk
things like
about
that.
so kids, and the reason why I thought of the fireworks is because of a situation that happened at our venue. This is probably 10 years ago. I haven't allowed fire sparklers in a long time because we had mom and her husband brought their 3-year-old. They had a sparkler exit. The little girl was standing right in front of her mom. Her mom was inebriated, and she was waving the sparkler around. The ash from the sparkler fell on her daughter like this across her face, and she got 3rd-degree burns all the way across her face. It was that situation that I was like, and thank goodness they never came after us, but I know that they could have potentially, I don't know what could have come, but like crazier things have happened. We allowed that at our property, and I was just like, I didn't really feel like alcohol and fire should ever be
Yeah.
together. It's the reason why I feel very concerned about our fire pit. We pay an employee to sit at the fire pit every single wedding just to watch it, to make sure people aren't playing with it and things like that. So what are some of your thoughts about sparklers and
I'm
liability?
so my thing here is I don't want to be just like you don't want to be a no guy or a no lady to your clients. I don't want to be a no guy. Like I'm all on board for how can we creatively address this and loss control it. So, I have a lot of people who are like sparkler exits are what we do. It's something that is just we have to do it. Okay, that's fine. But here are the things. Nobody under 16 gets one or what they look like to be 16. Nobody who is visibly intoxicated. We also have a water bath, like a bucket next to if anything happens. Before the sparkler exit, we have the hose that is right there next to the exit. We wet down all the, if there's like pine straw or something like that, we wet that so we don't get, there's little things that you can do that are just, again, like think ahead, what could happen. I'm okay with sparklers if these things are, it's something that we got a hose, we've got water, they've got a place to put it. We don't have anybody but our staff lighting and providing the sparklers. Like it's not homemade, like something from some roadside fireworks stand.
Right.
It's something we know is quality and is not going to hurt somebody else.
And I think this is where it's like, we think, this is the trendy thing. There'll always be the Pinterest picture of the sparklers, and it is a fun look, and I get that. But there's a lot of venues out there, and when you talk about risk, when you're like, well, I'm a DIY venue, I'm not really there. That's a whole nother thing. Like, you're really running a business where you don't have a representative of your business there watching the shenanigans go down. Some, budget planner that's there doing the firework exit, and she's tired and wants to go home and doesn't care and she's not caring for the property like we would as venue owners or managers. So talk a little bit about that before we wrap up for the day. I have this question and then one last one, but how do you feel we should handle representation at our venues?
Well, I would say this one thing. If it happens in your space, it's your fault. Regardless of whether or not you're there, you owe a duty of care to that person to make sure it's safe. So my thought would be if you're not there and you don't have video, you're in a bad spot because they could effectively say anything happened and you're responsible for it. You don't get to skate the responsibility if you're not there. Like you don't just get to say, well, I wasn't there. It wasn't my venue for that time. It's not my problem. So, those are things that I think, again, you need eyes on things. Like it's important for you to take those steps to make sure that things aren't happening. Like when you have somebody, if you had an event that no one is there, what's the likelihood that is just going to get way out of hand? Like it's pretty high because nobody's there. It's like police officer, we get questions a lot of times. Well, do a police officer on property, like what's the standard of that? And I'm like, well, I think it goes back to your ideal client. Do you feel like you need that? What's the reason for the officer, number one? And then, if it's just your peace of mind, then yeah, you need one every time. Like that's just added peace of mind. So, I think again, goes back to loss control. Like you can do a ton of different stuff. And, I think everything probably helps.
I was actually, and of course, I'm sure you are too, in all these different wedding industry Facebook groups. And actually this week I saw a picture of someone that they brought their dog for the ceremony. And we don't have time to talk about dogs today, but it's a big one. They brought their dog and they put the dog into the bridal suite for the reception and just left it. And that dog destroyed. It ate chairs, it ate pillows. Yep. I mean, it was just like, get me out of here, right? You almost feel bad for the dog, but it's like, get me out of here. I'm in this strange place, whatever. And so one of the things that we implemented at our venue, just because of the liabilities that we know it could come with it, we don't allow them to stay beyond the ceremony. They could come for photos. They can be there for the wedding. They could be there for a few photos after, and then they have to go. And so we don't allow them to stay. And again, it's just, you have to think worst case scenario sometimes, like you want to think the best in people and that they're going to be good pet owners. The pet owners actually forgot that they even had their dog there. They were so drunk at the end of the night that they forgot the dog. Yeah. And so again, this kind of circles back to having someone, a representative of the venue at every single event, because if they had been there, they would have known. They would have heard a dog barking. They would have heard it scratching. They would have seen and caught it before it got to the point where it caused all this damage.
Yeah.
And then you're in a situation where you're afraid of a bad review when you go to them and you're like, I'm sorry, I'm having to keep your security deposit, all of these things that could have been avoided if you had representation the venue all along. But I want to close with just this question about cameras on property, because in my conversations with venues, I would say it's a very, very small percentage that actually have adequate video coverage. Would you agree with that? Yeah.
1,000%.
So now let me tell you, so at our venue, we have them multiple different locations, one looking down on the bar because that's a high risk area. And one that's from the other area that's kind of facing the dance floor and the DJ, and where we could get kind of a bird's eye view of the whole entire room. We have one at the entrance to our facility, so we could see the main entrance, who's coming in and out, because we have a very expensive gate that people love to ram. So we looked at all the places that we know we can typically have issues. We have one facing the ceremony where we could see people walking in and out that faces our pond, so we could see that very clearly. So again, when you have big properties, it's hard to think about like, how many cameras could I possibly have? And I don't have Wi-Fi. There's solutions for everything. But do you feel like this is an area that could it actually harm someone to have video coverage? Because I've had people tell me that I don't have cameras on purpose because I feel like it's more of a liability to have them, just on the devil's advocate side of it. What would you say to that person?
Yeah, no, I would not agree to that unless they have cameras in areas that they shouldn't, which would be a personal injury issue and like a violation of privacy. So anything like any sort of common area or where people would expect a modicum of privacy. Mm-hmm. That's kind of what the standard is there. So, the reason of privacy. So I think cameras are great because they're cheap. And when I say cheap, I mean, they're not $100, but you can get a really good camera system for maybe a couple $1,000. And that to me is worth, I can't tell you how many videos that we've received that are snippets of claims occurring that, there would have been a lot of room for speculation had there not been video for it. So, when I see video of the bridesmaid doing something crazy that she shouldn't have been and her falling, it's hard to argue with that versus what her and two witnesses that she's kind of coached to, like, well, there was this gap in the floor and my heel got stuck in it and I fell, and that's really your problem, not mine. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, those things are, I would tell you, what is that? An ounce of preparation's worth a pound of something. That's what I would fall in the $2,000 worth of video equipment is way better than $200,000 in a
Yeah.
personal injury
Yes.
claim.
I'll tell you, I shared one of the crazy stories with Tirzah many episodes ago. I can't remember which one, but I talked about this lady that came in and she pretended to fall. And actually, she ended up like trying to flash one of my managers. It was really funny, but like she fell, her legs are up in the air. She's, no
Oh,
panties
yeah.
on, just like, like, okay, this person's crazy kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like we knew right away when she did that. Well, then we got her ice. We, took a statement, did all the things, of course, you need to do. But she kept saying that her ankle was hurt and my ankle's hurt, my ankle's hurt. Well, then she got bored of sitting with the ice and we knew this would happen. And she was up dancing and she danced the night away and she was totally fine. And then the next day she contacted us and the bride saying that she was going to the hospital and that she's thinking about, legal action and all this kind of stuff. But if we didn't have video proof of her denying the ice, like saying, no, she didn't leave, she stayed, she partied all night long. That was a huge thing for us to have that video evidence. So I kind of had been like leery of having video coverage for a long time, but I'll tell you, like, we pop it up on our phone when we're not at work and our staff are managing. We could see what's going on. It's a great way for us to kind of have eyes on the property when we can't be there. And it gives us, at the very least, a lot of peace of mind to be like, okay, the ceremony's done. This is what's happening. Like, and our staff know that we watch too.
Yeah.
And we're not like sitting on our phone, like critiquing them. But when we're out of state and we want to be like, hey, it was supposed to rain and, like what's going
Yeah.
on at the ceremony space, it's good to know what's happening there. But there's so much that we could talk about. And I think as we wrap up today, the thing that I want to encourage you and listeners is that this is not an area to put your head in the sand. I heard of 2 venues just this week that are closing down, and it's one lawsuit could put you under. There's so much more, and we're going to be talking about this in future episodes, even from a legal perspective of things that you could put in place with your contracts and protections on that way. But it all really is closely connected to what Justin is talking about today, your contracts, your risks, making sure that you're covering all your bases. And a lot of us get into this venue space and we don't have a background in this. And it's not your fault that you don't know, but I say this all the time, is that you have to invest in the right people. You have to spend money to make money, right? You have to spend money to get the people in place that know more than you. And if you think that you know everything,
Yeah.
give me a call and I'll put you straight, because none of us know it all. And we need to surround ourselves, right? That's what this season is all about. This toolbox of people that can stay in their lane and really specialize and be experts in their area so that we could go off and be doing all the other things that we need to be doing as venue owners and not feel fear and be, like you said, what are the things that keep you up at night? We don't have to live that way, So what are any closing thoughts that you have for listeners today, Justin? And then also after that, share if anyone wants to reach out to you, how they could do that.
Yeah, sure. So what I would say, and we've talked a lot about things that don't involve insurance, but I want to be really I want to let you know that is the insurance side is what we do really well, and that we are experts in that because we take time to do the other things and work through a process. So, that I don't want to ever shy away from the fact that, yeah, we get paid to be insurance people. We don't really function that way a lot of the time, but it's my job every day to work really hard to find the best terms that I can for every venue owner that we work with. But that involves some other things. So I'll just stress that too. That's definitely something we embrace. And we, as humbly as I can say it, I don't think there's anybody else out there that does as good a job as we do, because I don't know of another group of people who do what we do or specialize in working with venue owners. So anyway, but from my perspective, as far as like how to reach out to us and that sort of thing, that's nuptialrisk.com. That's nuptialrisk.com. There's a little questionnaire on there. Are we the right fit? You can get in touch with us that way. Or you can also message us Instagram and Facebook at Nuptial Risk. hello@nuptialrisk.com if you're of the email persuasion. We'll be glad to help, but I will tell you, there's no easy button. It's something that, like I said, it's a conversation. We're not pushy. I'm not a salesperson. Hopefully that comes across in I have a heart for service. That's why I love my job and I love the people we work with, because they also love to serve people. And I think that's, if I go back to what I believe and who I am, if you do things the right way, then you'll end up where you need to be. So that's kind of how we work.
I love it. Today was so great. And again, we could be here for hours, but I know listeners only have such an attention span. So
Sure.
I just want anyone that's listening to know, like, people that we have here on this show have my stamp of approval, and they are people that I know, like, and trust, and that there are a lot of people in this industry that don't have good intentions. And so that is why I really wanted this episode, this episode for sure, but this whole season, to any one of these people that you reach out to, you can know that they are people of integrity and that have your best in mind. And so I firmly believe that about Justin, for sure. But thank you so much for
Thank
being
you,
on the show
Tirzah.
today. Thank you for your love for the industry, for bringing the laughter. If you follow him, he did 50 days of real. It's 50 days, right?
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
tough.
And he talked about everything. So go take a peek at those. I learned some things too watching his reel. So it was fun for me to follow along with that. But again, thanks for being on today. For our listeners, until next time, I wish you much success in all that you do. We'll see you next time.